Good morning. Welcome to this worship service at First Parish Church of Kingston, Massachusetts. I am the Reverend Monica Jacobson Tennyson. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve this church as its minister. Today we are having a question box Sunday, so things are a little different than they often are. You will notice that the chat is set up so that you can only send a message to the church Zoom account, the one I'm logged in on. That's so that your questions don't go astray during the service and I can know that I have received and collected them. You will have time during this first part of the service to send in any questions you have about Unitarian Universalism, about history, about church practices, about living a good life in the world these days. Don't ask questions about astrophysics or magic tricks. I probably won't be able to answer those. I probably wouldn't even be able to convincingly make up a story. If you want me to explain how supernovas work, I cannot. So give me UU-based questions. Our Director of Family Ministry, Jen Shattuck, will also be answering questions. So you can ask questions about children and their spiritual lives, about religious education. Jen is also a big UU history geek as I am, so we will probably share the history questions. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Our worship associate is Tom Agello, and Tom has our chalice lighting words this morning.
We light our chalice with these words from Julianne Lepp. We seek our place in the world and the answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. And may the light of our chalice remind us that this is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and welcoming, of multiple truths.
Thank you, Tom. Our opening hymn this morning, also recorded and made into a beautiful video by Tom, is Gathered Here. So while you are muted, you are invited to listen, to sing, to hum, to do a part in the round, whatever is right for you today.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in struggle and the power, Spirit here draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Spirit draw near. Spirit draw near.
Thank you again, Tom. We are going to pause now for a moment of prayer or meditation or reflection, whatever is the best practice for you. Because this week marks 1 year of dealing with this COVID pandemic, 1 year of staying physically apart in order to keep each other safer, 1 year of change and challenge. And my colleague, the Reverend Joanna Lubkin, who serves All Souls Church in Braintree, wrote a beautiful piece speaking to this moment. Reverend Joanna is a Jewish Unitarian Universalist who has a real gift for prayer, and I am so grateful to her for sharing these words. Please join with me. Holy One, as of this week, we have spent 1 full year apart. We pause this morning to name and lift up the jumble of feelings we hold We grieve for those we have lost, whether COVID took them or whether the pandemic took away our chances to be together to mourn their loss. We say their names now, these beloved friends and family members that we have lost since last March. You can say their names aloud to yourself now as we pause for a moment. We hold the memories of those we have lost in our hearts. We hold in our prayers all those who are recovering from COVID and those long haulers who are dealing with the lasting effects of this illness. We hold in love all those who have lost work during this pandemic, those whose schooling has been interrupted, those who struggle to parent while working from home, those frontline workers who are at risk every day, and those who feel the ache of isolation and loneliness. We think of all the occasions, holidays, and celebrations we missed this year. We think of the last time we sang together in our sanctuary, not knowing how long it would be until we would be able to safely do so again. And we give thanks for the gifts we have found amid the loss and distance. This community has been so creative, so courageous, and so caring, finding ways to stay connected, being willing to try new ways of gathering, steadfastly reaching out to one another. We give thanks for the ways we've been able to grow the boundaries of our community beyond geography, welcoming in those from far away. And we give thanks for the human miracle of 3 vaccines making their way to us in less than a year, each one a cause for celebration and relief. Holy One, source of resilience, help us to hold on through whatever yet may come. May we be resolute of heart as we mask up, as we continue to care for each other by keeping a distance, knowing it to be an act of love. May we be open and curious about the possibilities that unfold before us, seeing the ways that we can get not just back to normal, but forward to better. In the spirit of prayer, meditation, and love, let us share a few moments in sacred silence. May it be so. As we return to the flow of our service, Jen and I have set aside a special time for any children who have questions they would like to ask them this morning. So if you have young ones near you, you can type their question in the chat and it will go to me, or you can indicate that you would like to unmute so that your child can ask a question directly. Do we have any kids who've brought questions today? Okay, I see one question in the chat. Jen, are you able to get your video on? I know your connection was not happy earlier.
I am going to try. It keeps glitching because it says my connection is unstable. So I'm going to try, but I might have to turn it off at some point if you can't hear me, or I will try again.
Okay.
Hello all. Good to see you.
We're going to see if this works. Jen, we have a question, which is what's going on with Ellery Church Mouse?
Ellery! Ellery is living quite happily in my office in a little box that once held tea. It is the perfect size for him. He is hard at work on a project. He's very small. So any work of drawing or writing or typing or ordering any sort of admin work is quite challenging for a mouse. So he's hard at work on a project that is related to First Parish Kingston, but it is taking him quite a long time, and I am assisting him as needed. He is happy every day in his writing and typing and life of the mind. He's a contemplative mouse.
Perfect. Thank you for that update on Ellery. Any other questions from kids? That is okay. So we are going to move next to our reading, which Tom has for us.
Choose to Bless the World by Reverend Rebecca Parker. Your gifts, whatever you discover them to be, can be used to bless or curse the world. The mind's power, the strength of the hands, the reaches of the heart, the gift of speaking, listening, imagining, seeing, waiting. Any of these can serve to feed the hungry, bind up wounds, welcome the stranger, praise what is sacred, do the work of justice, or offer love. Any of these can draw down the prison door, hoard bread, abandon the poor, obscure what is holy, comply with injustice, or withhold love. You must answer this question. What will you do with your gifts? Choose to bless the world. The choice to bless the world is more than an act of will, a moving forward into the world with the intention to do good. It is an act of recognition, a confession of surprise, a grateful acknowledgement that in the midst of a broken world, unspeakable beauty, grace, and mystery abide. There is an embrace of kindness that encompasses all of life, even yours. And while there is injustice, anesthetization, or evil that moves a holy, there also moves a holy disturbance, a benevolent rage, a revolutionary love, protesting, urging, insisting, that which is sacred will not be defiled. Those who bless the world live their life as a gesture of thanks for this beauty and this rage. The choice to bless the world can take you into solitude to search for the sources of power and grace, native wisdom, healing, and liberation. More, the choice will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, the chorus of life welcoming you. None of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting.
Thank you, Tom, for reading that so beautifully. As we begin the sermon portion of A Question Box Sunday, I love to have a reading that grounds us in the bigger question of Unitarian Universalism, which is always, how will you use your gifts to bless the world? Now, there are many other questions we come carrying when we gather as a community, and this Sunday is a Sunday when you are invited to use the chat box to send them in. You probably have a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. If you click it, it'll bring up a little box, and there's a place to type where we'll let you say you are sending a message to First Parish Kingston. You could type in your box and hit enter, and it should come through to me. I will read them out and answer as many as I can. Typically on a question box Sunday, it's not possible to answer all the questions, but please do send in questions anyway, because I will hold on to them and they will inform future services this spring. While you're thinking about questions you may wish to put in the chat, we do have a few that were sent in ahead of time by email. So we will get started with those. And I'm going to bring Jen's video up as well. So our first question to address is, compared to Christian religions, how do UU teachings on sexuality differ? Jen, are you frozen or are you there? There you are.
If I need to turn my video off, if that's easier, I can.
I think you're good. So go ahead.
Great. So it has long been the stance of Unitarian Universalist churches to affirm human sexuality and to see it as sacred. And for most of the 20th century, this made us unique as compared to other churches that came out of the Christian tradition. For at least 90 years, I went back and I was looking at the history of Unitarian and Universalist churches, lifting up this idea of life-giving human sexuality. And for at least 90 years, both Unitarian and Universalist churches were coming out in favor of things like family planning, sexuality education for children. And you can see this even in the present day in our whole lives classes. We have a curriculum that's based in values like self-worth and justice and inclusivity. And that means that we teach human sexuality as something that is integral to the human experience, and that is also, the teachings themselves can be a tool to do justice in the world. In our OWL curriculum, we intentionally lift up the experiences of queer people, of trans people, of people in all different kinds of relationships. And when kids come out of this program, they're ready to be in community with all types of people. And I want to say also that we are not alone in this now. It did make us really unique for a long time, pardon me, but now other liberal Christian denominations are having their own programs that are similar. I can think of like the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, has a program that is really similar to OWL. Our OWL program is done in conjunction with the United Church of Christ. So in the good work that we did for a really long time, it really did change the way that other churches teach sexuality education now.
And I want to add just a little bit of, the theological framework I bring to that question, which is that for many churches, there's questions of, in the Christian tradition, there's a lot of teaching around original sin, right? People were embodied, Adam and Eve did such and such a thing. Now everyone has to deal with that. And for UUs, it's much more about original blessing. What a gift it is to be embodied and to be alive on this earth. That if you are somebody who is reading biblical texts for inspiration and you're reading Genesis, you see that the story is that God created everything and said it was good. It's good to be alive, to be embodied. And part of being embodied is knowing about your body, how it works, who you love, how it is that you live in this place, and accepting that people live in their bodies in many, many ways, and they are all good, and they are all holy. And this certainly has been a much more radical position at other times in history. And I am grateful that we are coming to share it with more and more of our interfaith cousins in these times. I'm just also copying questions out of the chat. These are good, you guys. Okay, next question. What is your opinion of euthanasia? So I'm going to answer the complicated UU overview, which is that it depends, right? There are some Unitarian Universalists who are big proponents of death with dignity, of making sure the option exists for people who are terminally ill, who have a reasonable belief that there is only going to be increasing suffering as they near death, that there is a support for folks who are choosing to end life under those circumstances. And the tension is that we also have a first principle, which affirms the inherent worth and dignity of all people. And that means that we also say, nobody outside of you can ever tell you that your life is not worth living. And there's concern about this kind of slippery slope of, if somebody's pressuring you to say, you know, I think you should choose to be done with your life. It has to be a free choice. It has to be an informed choice. It has to be a choice that is not rooted in a moment of despair, but in an understanding of how things are unfolding. So it's a complicated question. I will say a friend and mentor of mine, the Reverend Judy Wells, was terminally ill and lives in Oregon, where it is possible to choose death with dignity, to do physician-assisted euthanasia. And she did choose to do that in September. And for her and for her partner and for her family, it was a really beautiful choice. She died exactly as she wanted to die, with the music that she wanted playing and the windows open on a beautiful day. And so I affirm and respect her choice. And I also affirm and respect that it is a complicated topic and not something for a person to choose lightly or because of a temporary state of despair that may pass. So my opinion is, it is a topic that requires deep discussion and discernment. Our next question, what 3 to 5 people from the past are considered the most influential heroes and heroines of Unitarian Universalism? So this one's a little tricky. Most influential. I think if I was talking about most influential in the history of the world, I would start with David Ferenc, who was a Transylvanian Unitarian minister about 450 years ago. He is the clergy person who consulted with a teenage king, a young king named John Sigismund, who was trying to rule Transylvania at the time. And this was a period in European history where it was very common for kings and queens to dictate the state religion, and everyone had to practice it. So bam, you were all Catholic now. Bam, you were all Lutheran now. And David Ferenc, who we say his name in English as Francis David, because in Hungarian names, the family name comes first and then the first name. So I'm going to use his Hungarian name, but you may have heard of him as Francis David. David Ferenc was one of the clergy people that King John Sigismund called to the court. And he said, what do you think? Tell me why your religious tradition is the best. Should I make everybody be Unitarian? And David Ferenc said, I think people should be free to choose the religious tradition that helps them to live a good life. I think they should be free to go to the church that makes sense to them. I think they should be free to find the clergy person who teaches the way that they feel they can connect with and learn from. I don't think it's the business of the king or anybody to tell any one person how they are supposed to manage their religious life. And John Sigismund was so moved and persuaded by this that he issued an edict of toleration. And for a brief period, Transylvania was the first part of Europe to say, there is no state religion. You should choose what makes sense to you. And indeed, John Sigismund became a Unitarian and was a Unitarian king for the sadly brief portion of his life that came after this. He did die young, as many people did in those days. So David Ferenc, hugely important and influential, in part because introducing this idea of religious freedom also introduced to European cultures the idea that the people have wisdom and can choose, that people can vote to call a minister. And out of this grows some of the European ideas about democracy, that people can vote to choose other kinds of leaders as well. Building on that, I'm also going to name John Adams as a hugely influential Unitarian. Perhaps you've heard of him. He used to live around here. He helped start a country. He and his wife Abigail were both Unitarians, although they didn't use the term Unitarian at that time because the name Unitarian didn't come into use until the early 19th century. But John and Abigail, as well as their son, John Quincy, also a past president of the United States, and his wife, Louisa Catherine, they all attended the church in Quincy, Massachusetts, and all four of them are actually entombed under that church. And when it's not pandemic times, you can go and visit them. You can take a tour of the church. You can go down to the crypt and be there where they are. So I'm going to name Abigail Adams also as a hugely influential Unitarian of the past. Although she didn't get to attend the Continental Congress, you may know she and John wrote many, many letters back and forth. And she was such a powerful conversation partner for him. And she was always pushing him, you know, you need to do better. You need to remember the ladies. You need to do justice for people of color. You need to, you know, make this world better and better and better. And you have the privilege to do it now. And I am not going to let you forget that you have the privilege to do better right now. I'm going to give Jen a chance to add some folks who come to mind for her.
The two people that come to mind for me are people that you may not have heard of, but were highly influential in the way that we currently do religious education in our churches. And the first person I'm thinking of, it actually goes the way we do RE in the 21st century actually goes back to the 1840s. The most influential person that I can think of is Bronson Alcott, who was the father of Louisa May Alcott, the author of Little Women. And he founded a school in Boston in 1834, which was called the Temple School. And it was a school that was based on the educational philosophy of conversation. And he taught many things in his school, but including religious education, which was then not done in churches, but that you would often get as part of your just regular education. And as part of his work, he would talk to children about the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of other religious figures as well. But he ended up writing a book called Conversations with Children on the Gospels. And it's literally conversations with the children in his school about, what do we think this means? Why do we think such and such a thing happened? What does it mean for us today? And this is exactly the kind of work we do in our churches today with a program like Spirit Play. We engage children with stories in such a way that they can come to their own understanding of what such a story might mean for them. And Bronson Alcott was therefore like way ahead of his time in terms of doing this. His school was actually forced to close because in the course of these conversations, kids were talking about things like conception and birth and death. And they were considered topics that were inappropriate, but they're exactly the kind of things that we talk about in our RE programs today. And we do that because people like him and people like Sophia Lyon-Vaz, who was another really influential religious educator, who also had this idea that if we ask children what they think, they're philosophers and they're theologians, and we can learn so much from them. You know, they came to this idea that children are people of wholeness. And I wish that they were better known because they are so influential. They are well known among religious educators, but I wish that more people knew about them because they're so influential to the work that we do today and to us as individuals.
I want to lift up a couple more people moving ahead in time as Jen moved us ahead in time. So if you were here for the UU the Vote service, you heard the story of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She was a Black woman, a Unitarian, born in 1825. She was born into a free Black family in Maryland. And as she grew up, she became an influential speaker. She traveled from place to place talking about abolition and racial justice. She was one of the first women to publish. She was often a groundbreaking teacher at schools that had previously only had male instructors. She traveled all over the United States and Canada at a time when it wasn't really considered becoming or appropriate for women to travel around and to speak about social issues, because she knew that it was important that somebody go out and educate people about why slavery was wrong and what it would take to transform society in the service of racial justice. She was a person of such conviction that she wouldn't purchase anything that had been produced in any way involving slavery. So for example, she did not wear any cotton clothing, and she wouldn't eat any sugar. She was so firmly grounded in her vision of the world that we are called to build, and she spent her life doing her part. So she is another influential and inspirational figure from our past. And I also want to name one of our influential and inspirational figures from our present, the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt. Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt is an instructor at Starr King School for the Ministry. She is a theologian. She is an incredible person of great wisdom and insight. And during the period after the resignation of Reverend Peter Morales as the president of the UUA, and prior to the election of our current president, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt was part of the team of 3 people who shared that interim period of the presidency, making her the first woman to serve in a presidential role in our Unitarian Universalist Association. She's also just a really fabulous person. And carrying on that theme, we have a question in honor of Women's History Month. Please tell us about the first women preachers. So I'm going to reach back into the 19th century again. The first woman to be ordained in the US was a woman named Antoinette Brown Blackwell. She was ordained by a Congregationalist congregation. She was not recognized nationally by a denomination. But the fact of her ordination and the fact of her local service provided some inspiration and some spiritual sustenance to other women who felt a call to the ministry. And her contemporary, Olympia Brown, was ordained by the Universalist Church of America and went on to serve multiple congregations, meaning that in our history is the first US woman to be ordained and recognized on a national level. Olympia felt a call to ministry when she was quite young. It wasn't the done thing for women even really to go to college then, but she was very clear she needed to go to college and she needed to go to seminary. So she went, I believe, to Oberlin in Ohio, and she applied to St. Lawrence Seminary in upstate New York, which is a historically Universalist school. And when she wrote, the Dean of Admissions said, "Miss Brown, I do not believe that women have any business becoming ministers. But if you believe you feel a calling, I will leave it between you and your understanding of God." Now, he thought that would cause her to say, "Oh, fine, you're right. I give up. I overreached my place." But Olympia said, "Great. My understanding of God calls me to be a minister. I will be there in the fall." St. Lawrence was not really ready for her. And she suffered a lot of bullying from her male classmates. They would make fun of her voice. They would make fun of the fact that she had to stand on a box to see over the pulpit because she was shorter than them. They really gave her a hard time, and she persevered. And she went on to have beautiful ministry with churches in many places. There is a story that may be apocryphal, but I really love it. So I'm going to tell it to you anyway, and you should take it with a grain of salt. The story is that when Olympia was candidating with the church in Racine, Wisconsin, there was a terrible storm and the river flooded, and the congregation was not able to gather to vote on whether to call her. So Reverend Olympia Brown got herself a little boat, and she went back and forth across the river, visiting every household in the congregation, collecting their votes so that the vote could still happen despite the natural disaster. That may not be true, but it certainly captures the spirit of her perseverance and her determination to answer the call she felt and to serve in the ways that she could. Jen, do you have any famous women from history you want to add?
I had mentioned Sophia Lyon-Fahs before. She was a really highly influential Unitarian Universalist religious educator who really changed the way that we do religious education, not even within Unitarian Universalism, but within almost every Christian denomination or denominations that come out of Christianity. There was no catechism in her classes. There was storytelling and experiential learning, a type of learning that would be really highly recognizable to you if you have visited us downstairs in the RE space. And she died in 1978. At the age of 101, she retired when she was 88 years old. She did amazing religious education work for the entirety of her life. And you can still see her influence today. I feel it every day, you know, when I'm designing curriculum, when I'm writing Time for All Ages, when I'm, you know, thinking about what is the next right thing to do. I feel Sophia influencing my work, and I know that's true of a lot of religious educators. And I'm just really grateful that we, so many years later, still get to benefit from her ideas and teachings and influence.
And in fact, at Meadville Lombard Theological School, where I did my seminary training, they have what they call the FOS Collaborative, which is designed to continue bringing together UUs in service of the vision of Sophia Lyon-Fahs and to keep innovating and creating and sharing with each other. Speaking of innovating and creating, we have a couple questions about crafting worship. One is, are there special themes or rituals throughout the year that would typically be observed at First Parish were we not in COVID times? And another is about how we plan and choose and put together the content of the worship service. So first, I want to say that this year obviously is very different from pretty much every other year in any of our lives. In a typical year, there would be much more opportunity for embodied worship, participatory worship, and for sharing in rituals that this congregation celebrates, as many UU congregations do. Things like having a water service at the beginning of the year and a flower service at the end of the year. I want to tell a little bit about the context for those. So a water service, a water ceremony, a water communion, this comes out of some continental UU women's gatherings in the 1980s, where the folks who gathered developed a ritual of each bringing water from a place that was important to them and pouring all the waters together in a ceremony to symbolize the joining of all these representatives from many places, all the wisdom they carried with them, and all the wisdom that the water carries back through many generations of people. And because as UUs, when we see a good thing, we often get excited to do it in our own congregations. These women carried the ritual back out to their home churches. And now it is very widely, perhaps universally observed, usually on the first Sunday of the regular church year in the fall, as a way of symbolically gathering all that people have come bringing from time they may have spent apart or away during the summer. So that certainly is typically part of the worship life of this congregation. We did a version of it in the parking lot this September. It really wasn't the same, but there was an opportunity to bring water and to join those waters together. It's also widely shared across the United States and in many places around the world to have a flower communion or a flower ceremony or a flower celebration in June. That comes to us from Norbert Čapek, who was a Czech Unitarian minister serving in Prague around the time of World War II. Norbert Čapek was a very revolutionary thinker for someone serving a church in Eastern Europe in the 1930s and 40s. And he felt that one of the best ways to lift up that the strength of a Unitarian church is the diversity of its members is to, once a year, have everyone bring a different flower so that we can see and touch and smell how each flower is different, and all of them together make a beautiful bouquet. It is from his service that that idea spread across the world. And it is my hope that in June it is possible to have a flower communion, probably in the parking lot. But still, that is my hope. In terms of other special services, this church also observes a music Sunday and an RE Sunday in the spring. We don't know what those will look like this year, but typically there is a service to celebrate music and the many contributions of musicians in the congregation, and a service to lift up the children, what they are learning, how they are growing, and how this community nurtures the young people who are growing among us. I got to look and see what the other question was again. Oh yes, okay. How is the service constructed? So in the before times, when we weren't living through a global slow-moving disaster and dealing with the fact that many folks are fatigued and it's prudent to have a simplified service, we had a service that would include varieties of music, which we could make together or share in as the choir sang them. We would have a piece of the service specifically designated to lift up wisdom from the great religious traditions of the world. And when Jen and I would plan the service, and I'll let Jen unmute and speak to this also, often we would know what the theme was. We'd look at the Soul Matters theme for the month, or we'd think about what was coming up on the calendar. You know, was it late October and it was time to have a day of remembrance? And then we would meet and start with the time for all ages and grow the service from the seed of that portion. How do we present this idea in a way that is engaging to people of every age, from the very smallest to the very eldest? And then from that grows the rest of the service. Jen, do you want to comment a little more on that?
I just want to lift up that this is still a new, fairly new way of working for ministers and religious educators to work by starting with the time for all ages and moving out from there. And I think it is a real blessing for those of us in this work to feel that what we do is at the center of, you know, of the like sacred part of the service, that there's this one idea, you know, we get that idea from Soul Matters often, we find readings, we like, but just this idea that the sacred idea that we can have the, whatever the concept is, be accessible to people of every age, as Reverend Monica said, through story or through song or whatever. And it is such a gift to me to be able to work that way. And I know that more and more churches are beginning to do this as well. And it allows us to be really flexible about what we can offer you.
I think there was a workshop at last General Assembly from a different church staff team who build things in exactly this way. All right, I'm mindful that it's 11:20. So as I said, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions. So we will hold on to some of these for future services. But I'm going to try to do a little bit of a lightning round. So here's another one. We've been mostly online for a year now. When will it be time to have in-person church again? Boy, is that a question on everybody's mind and heart these days. So you may have seen in the winter, we have a pandemic activities policy, which is driven by the local health metrics. So there's a website called COVID Act Now that shows what the daily, it's updated every day, what the daily infection rates are in Plymouth County. And that is the tool that we use to guide us. And it is disappointing to look at it and see that the county is still orange, the infection rates are still pretty high, because since we are human people who live in human bodies, we miss each other. And we feel anniversaries and we think, oh, hasn't it been long enough already? It's been a whole year. But viruses don't care how we feel, and they don't know anything about the passage of time. So I'm going to show you the graph quick. This is the graph that I look at every single day. You can see this is where we are now, this orange line. So we're still up pretty high, even though a lot of time has passed, because we were quite alarmingly high for a lot of the winter. This yellow portion here, here's the summer when it was possible to do a lot more things. Here's September when it was possible to do a few outdoor services because the rates were really pretty low. You can see that having climbed so high, it's just taking a while for things to come back down to a level that allows safer gatherings of more than just a handful of people. So this website is what we look at all the time, basically, always with fingers crossed that it's continuing to go down and down and down. It is my hope that those numbers keep going down as vaccination rates go up, and that it will be possible to have some outdoor services in the spring, because it is good to get to be together. And also, my first priority, our first priority, is always keeping people safe, making sure that this is a community of inclusion where folks who may be at higher risk for personal reasons don't have to feel that they have been left out or excluded in favor of letting other folks who are more able to take risks gather. We're always trying to hit the balance where it feels open for as many folks as possible to be welcome to participate. And it's really hard. There aren't any easy answers, and you'll see different people answering the question differently. So looking at the science, being driven by the data, is our best attempt to make good choices that uphold our values of inclusion and of respect for life and of protecting those who are vulnerable. Okay, probably gonna have to be the last question. There are so many social justice issues. How do we know where to put our energies? I'm going to give you a Joanna Macy style answer and say that where your passion is where you should put your energies. So if you've read Joanna Macy's books, she's an American Buddhist who does a lot of work on climate change, or if you had a chance to do one of the workshops that she and her team do, you may have heard that because everything is interconnected, working on any justice issue helps the healing of the whole. So if your passion is for racial justice, but you worry that maybe in these times of a warming earth, you should be working on climate justice, don't worry, they are intertwined. If your passion is for feeding your neighbors who are hungry, and you worry that this doesn't do enough to work on big systemic problems, don't worry. Hungry people also still need to eat. All the work is worthy, and all the work makes a difference. So the way to know where to put your energy as an individual is to find where you come most alive in working for justice, where you feel like, okay, this is hard, it's long, it's often discouraging, and I have such commitment, I can sustain myself. And then the question on a congregational level has to do with where is the energy of many members of the congregation coalescing in that kind of way, because it is so often discouraging. And so we have to go where our hearts call us to go, and not where somebody else tells us that we ought to go, and trust that all the work comes together to build the world we dream of. And now I really have to stop because it's 11:25. Thank you for your questions. I am going to very briefly mention that now is the time in our service when we receive an offering. Giving information is in the email order of service you received. You can donate online, you can text to give, you can mail a check to the church office. And please know that everything you give is most gratefully received. I am also grateful to say our music for reflection this morning is a recording of hymn number 391, Voice Still and Small by Kara Roth. Please go ahead. While you're muted, you can sing, you can hum, you can listen, you can sink into this music.
Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing. Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
We have come to the time in our service when we extinguish our chalices. I am going to pass it over to Tom, who has our words.
We extinguish our chalice with these words from Reverend Kelly Weissman Spruth Jackson. I send you out now to share yourself with the world. May its promise and complexity set your mind ablaze. May you hold fast to what your life has taught you. May you question everything. And when you have changed the world and the world has changed you, may you return again to this place and share what you've learned with us.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all for being here this morning. I am going to hit stop on our recording so that we can share joys and sorrows with each other.